All right, well, good morning. Okay, cool. There's a little coffee kicking in there. That's good. You guys are still with it. Because I know you guys were having a good time because I flew in around 1 o'clock last night, and I had people in the hallway just greeting me saying, "How's it going?" And I'm like, all right, these guys are going to be a little slow in the morning, but it's going to be good. So what you did not hear about my background is that I have a degree from computer science from UC Berkeley, and I was absolutely fascinated on how much the media portrays artificial intelligence in a light that isn't exactly correct. And I wanted to show here some really easy to understand principles about AI, but also make a strong case of where human touch is needed and cannot be replaced in the near and upcoming future. So that's what we'll be covering today in the session of Being Human in the Age of Digital Innovation. Now, before I get too much into the nitty-gritty, the nuts and bolts, I'd like to get to know you guys a little bit better. For those of you who've been watching the news lately, you probably noticed that there's lots of headlines about AI that generate that anxiety, right? Like, will AI replace accountants? Or better yet, will machines replace humans in the hospitality industry? What about manufacturing or police firefighters, all that good stuff? And this is one of my favorite ones, the World Economic Forum. And they stated why robots could replace teachers as soon as 2027. Apparently, no one at the World Economic Forum has kids. Right? Because you really think critically about this. Yeah, it's a catchy headline, but can you really fathom a robot disciplining a kid? Like, and the ethical issues around that? Like, really think that through. And that's where I feel like a lot of these headlines are not concrete and actually well established, and more it's just to get clicks and generate more fear and anxiety. So we'll be noticing that trend throughout this presentation. Now, a simple little quiz. I'd like to go through these just to get to know you guys a little bit better. For those of you who might have heard of Marvin Minsky, if you haven't, he was a co-founder at the AI laboratory at MIT. So if you're going to think about anyone who knows a good amount about artificial intelligence, this is the guy. And back in 1970, he was known to make some pretty bold claims about where we'll be in the world of AI. And he stated, machines will be capable of doing any work a human can do in how long? Do you think he said, well, it will be 3 to 8 years? Or did he say 10 to 20? Or was it 20 to 30? For those of you who believe it was A, go ahead and raise your hand for A. What about for B? And what about for C? That's what I would think too. But he said 3 to 8. This is 1980 or 1970. We just went to the moon. And he's making these bold claims, and I'm still having Grammarly telling Grammarly it's wrong. Right? Like, we're still running into these issues, and that really surprises me is how someone so close can be so far away from the truth. Here's another example for you about the world of AI. And you hear one here like TED Talks? TED Talks, pretty cool, huh? I have 2 of them. Not on the big TED stage. This is the TED stage where all the billionaires go, and Bill Gates makes presentations about, pandemics before pandemics were a thing, right? Well, in 2023, the ChatGPT founder was super famous, and he was invited to go to the annual conference. And he was in an interview session with someone, and they asked him, what are you most concerned about with ChatGPT changing the world we live in? And do you think he said, well, I'm most concerned about it spreading misinformation and interfering with elections both domestically and internationally? Or was he more concerned about kids and potentially disrupting education? Maybe kids can't learn as well when they have ChatGPT to write their essays for them. Or was he more concerned about ChatGPT being abused for spamming Viagra emails? I actually had an event planner take offense to that. You take that out of the line. Anyways, well, all right. For those of you who think A, go ahead and raise your hands. What about B, education? And C, spamming Viagra emails? My people, okay. It's actually split thirds. Usually there's only 1 or 2 people trying to troll me, but this is about a third, so it's a little higher. He said, if you want to rewind back and watch it, he said, I am more concerned about spreading misinformation He did not mention education. But what was the number one use case for ChatGPT when it first came out? Well, of course, spamming Viagra emails. Number one use case. You don't believe me? Watch the TED Talk. It's in it. Who could have guessed? And last but not least, what about things like art? Can AI now win art shows for cash prizes? What do you think? Is it true, false, or what is art? Well, this is where it gets very interesting, and where a lot of the anxiety that we have about AI is really well-founded. If you look back 2 years ago, there was an art show that was held in Colorado, and there were many submissions throughout the state, and one of the submissions at the state fair, an individual said, what if I use this platform called Midjourney to create an art piece, put in some prompts, and submit it and see if anyone votes for my art piece? Now, of course, this individual put his name and said via Midjourney. Midjourney was the platform he used. Well, it turns out that the judges didn't know what Midjourney meant, so probably they thought it was an alias, not really thinking through it. And which one of these top 3 places do you think was the AI one? Left, center, or right? Yeah, it's the right. And it overwhelmingly won first place. And a controversy began. AI now won a cash prize at an art show. And many people saw this thinking, I can't even get close to that level of art, and AI can now win art shows. Really undermine the fact of where our human touch really goes, because something like art is something uniquely human. And yet, here's robots doing what we can do. And it really started bringing forward that argument of the ultimate fear of being replaced. Well, we'll be going into some of the limitations of that in this presentation, especially in the area of recruiting. But I also want to highlight where we can use this new technology to make our lives more effective. If any of you are curious on the mathematical side of things, it's using something called diffusion modeling. At the end of the session, I do have a QR code, so if you're curious about looking at the research paper about that, you can check it out. It was a new algorithm that came out about 10 years ago. So for those of you who don't know much about AI, I'm going to give you a very high-level overview to demystify what we're talking about with artificial intelligence. A quick overview we can do is sort of a thought experiment of how can we write code, an AI, to help us cross the street safely. So we'll use the traditional methods. In the 1980s, the normal systems and the traditional thought of artificial intelligence was something called expert systems. Now, these are very simple. They're essentially these 2 variables you'll take in, how far a car is and how fast it's going, right? If a car is really close, going fast, don't cross the street. Pretty simple. And what they'll do is they'll create these little statements saying, if the car is going too fast, given these 2 variables, don't cross. And if it is, cross. These are called if statements. If this, do this. If else, do this. And they would have thousands of these. Massive, massive ones. Goes for pages and pages and pages. Those were considered expert systems. Now, Marvin Minsky, during that time, used expert systems. And as you can imagine, if you're writing hundreds, if not thousands of these statements in order to create more complex solutions, you might have 2 conflicting with each other at times, and you might forget what you wrote, 2 months ago, and they can get into some really difficult situations. For instance, I tried writing an expert system to go around to different websites and collect information about events. Grabbing the event day, the time, even the title of the event, and it took me 6 months and 20,000 lines of code. The equivalent is probably writing a 60,000 word novel. It takes a long time to write that much code. Well, that didn't work out too well, and there's some limitations to expert models, because if we're trying to cross the street, what if there's a different sidewalk? It's not the same sidewalk each time. Or what if it's like the sidewalk isn't very visible, and we're on a turn, and the car can, not see us at the last minute? And what if there's fog? What if you're from Indiana and there's always fog? That makes it a lot more dangerous. What about if it's raining? What if the driver is texting? Man, we're getting a lot of variables here. What if we can't even see the driver texting? Or what if the driver's texting and listening to Taylor Swift, right? That is worst case scenario. So you can see there's so many different variables, and what the problem with expert systems is a lot of times we can't create elaborate enough systems to solve the problem. So what researchers started doing in the 1980s is they said, well, what if we start training an AI model to solve this for us? And training AI models are actually quite simple. So what you'll do is you'll get a whole bunch of data. Imagine that we cracked into all the CCTVs inside of a city. And we got all the speeds of the cars and all the amount of pedestrian accidents there were. And we got all the information and said, okay, we're going to give this all to an AI model, and it'll tell us the solution. I will show you how AI models are trained, and it's not that crazy. The first thing you need to know is there's something called a multi-layer perceptron. Why? AI scientists named this after the human mind, so if these sound very much like the human brain, that was sort of the goal. So there's something called a perceptron. This takes input. Again, going back to how close the car is and how fast it's going. If a car is 10 feet away and going 100 miles an hour, should you cross the street? No. This is like a coffee test. Should you cross the street? No, right? Okay. So these are the inputs. You get a whole bunch of the information, right? We got this from the CCTV cameras. Now, here's what most people don't know, is that there's something called a hidden layer. In this hidden layer, they have these nodes that have weights on them, and they'll take in all the inputs and do some basic calculations, right? We're talking about elementary math, algebra. And then, based off of that, say whether or not it's safe, giving you the final answer. Now, when you're first training an AI model, do you think it's going to give you the right answer a lot of the time? No, right? It'll make mistakes. In this case, let's say it says, oh, you'll be alive. You'll totally be alive if the car is going 100 miles an hour. 101? No. But 100 miles an hour? Yes. Well, what happens is, and this is the whole part where it learns and trains, there's something called backpropagation, where going back through each layer, it'll say, okay, we were wrong. We need to adjust these numbers called weights here a little bit based off of the data to make sure it's correct. And then what it'll do is, if you anyone took your calculus in college? Okay, chain rule. That's what happens right there. It's something you learn in calculus. This is just math. Does a little bit of algebra and multiplication, chain rule, boom, and adjusts. Now, this happens on an individual level. And this might sound pretty simple, and it is. And I want to show you the most simple scenario, because if you start zooming out a little bit, you will do hundreds, thousands of the input layer, output layer, checking the input, and then backpropagation, adjusting its weights. So it's back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, adjusting the weights constantly. It looks like this real time. And you can see how each one of these gets highlighted. This train in progress is more for looking at the pixelations of CAPTCHAs for numbers. And you can see how the inputs are all highlighted on which is the correct number and the likelihood of it being that number going through the model. That's it. That's all what your basic AI model is. This whole thing about ChatGPT and all that, there you go. Now, this is a very simple version. You can have dozens of layers. You can have thousands of inputs, which can make things a lot more complex. And there's a whole art of how many layers and nodes and all that kind of stuff you use. But that's the simple version. Now, the problem here is it will take a model hundreds, if not thousands of data points. And you can see if we give a lot of crap garbage to this AI, would it know the difference? No, right? And that's what the problem is. A lot of people in this room would say, well, maybe it can figure it out on its own. No, it doesn't. It's because it's trained with bad data, you'll get bad output. But yet, if you show like a butterfly to a child and say that's a butterfly, they can figure out a butterfly in almost any scenario within 1 or 2 tries for the rest of their life. It's pretty remarkable. And imagine if we found a butterfly that was blue instead of orange, but all of the data was in orange. Could we find what the butterfly is with AI? No. And you start to see some of those limitations when you start understanding the principles and the framework building blocks of building AI models. Now, with understanding these core principles, you will start to understand then these unique headlines that happen in recruiting. Like one of them, anyone here remember the whole Amazon scam when you had the, not scam, but the scenario where Amazon was being sued because it had a gender bias in its recruiting process? Okay, if you haven't heard the story, basically what happened was behind the scenes, AI was being used at Amazon, not surprisingly. And what they were doing is they were using a screen for all the resumes they were getting for recruiting and screening applicants. But what they started to find is that the AI models would start flagging things that females would have on their resumes more so than males, having a gender bias. Now, the reason for this, as we just learned, could be from the data. And what starts to happen is, if you work with the hidden layers, what it starts to do with different parts of the resume, if it says, hey, if it has the clubs and members, and if they're in DECA, that's this one right here, and that's a good thing. We want to have that higher. And then what about one for if they're a marketing intern? Yeah, that's another field, and this is another field, and they start finding unique fields. By the way, the engineers don't control that. That's where the calculus comes in and starts adjusting the weights. So what happened was a lot of the data that was being flooded into the system started creating weights that weren't necessarily aware of gender bias. So maybe you had 90 males, 10 females, and then a lot of the weight would be gauged towards that general populace. And that's where you start getting the bias inside of the data. One of the biggest concerns I hear at conferences whenever there's a director of engineering is everyone raises their hand and says, can you remove the data bias in the recruiting process, right? That's the problem. And you can see why, if you had hundreds of hidden nodes, how difficult that would be to kind of spot those unique things, because a lot of that's done through calculus. Very interesting on how that works. But I want to demystify some of the scenarios because there wasn't really some sinister person saying, oh, I hate women and I'm going to do bad things, right? It wasn't that scenario. Like, you run enough data through it, it's going to find weird things and steer you off in directions you cannot expect. That's why you get a lot of AI models that go off the rails, because you can't look at all scenarios given that it's sort of a black box once you start training it. So that's a high-level overview with AI models. Hopefully that demystifies it a little bit in terms of what's happening behind the scenes, and it's not some crazy Terminator ends, doomsday, whatever. So with that said, let's then zoom out a little bit and look at really how fast things are changing now, since we have a better grasp of AI. A good milestone for this is looking at how long does it take to reach 50 million users for any new technology. And you'll see here with like airplanes, it took 64 years, automobiles, 62, but as newer technologies come about, you'll notice a trend. And that trend is newer technologies start to be adopted faster when 50 million people are actually using it. You can see mobile phones in 12, internet in 7, Facebook in 4, you got WeChat here, and of course, Pokemon Go in 19 days. There was a platform 2 years ago that got 50 million people to adopt a new platform in just one day. It was not TikTok. Does anyone know which platform this was? Not ChatGPT. Yep. Threads. Nailed it. 50 million, competitor to X, Twitter.
That's because they, you loop in Instagram users and it's not that.
All right, we don't want to bag on that too much, but there's a lot of users though. That's what I'm trying to say. There's a lot, yes. They worked really hard. But you're right though, they did have that feed in from the other platforms, and so there was a huge spike, but then it also dropped. Now, on that note too, there's something you need to be aware of with any new technology. Something called a hype cycle. When people first hear about a new technology, you'll see this a lot in your space, they'll start saying it can change the whole world. And then there's the peak of inflated expectations. But as people use that technology more, they start becoming, this is not what we really were sold on. But eventually you find it's a good use case, and you get to the slope of enlightenment. If you draw it out, it looks like this. Simple little arrow. That might be hard to remember, so I figured out an analogy that is very easy to remember on the way that new technology adoption works. It's identical to dating. Okay, yeah, computer science people do this all the time. They take analogies from computer science to dating, and I'm going to do it now. So imagine you have a first date, and you're really excited about this person. You hear these great things. So you have these super high expectations. You take them out to a nice restaurant. You're hanging out there, wonderful time going, and in the middle of the conversation, they burp. Everyone stops and looks, and your expectations just plummet. But you hang around long enough to realize they make good cookies, so you say, okay, there's some good things and there's some bad things here. That's what happens with technology. You have these huge expectations and you realize it doesn't work out that well, but then eventually you find there's some pros. Every type of technology goes through this curve. And what we want to do today is look at what sort of newer technologies are on the fringe that only a few people are using and what sort of impact that it makes. Now, a great way of viewing this is through the adoption curve. The halfway point is when something becomes mainstream, and we want to be more looking on this edge, the fringe. We go to conferences for that, seeing what's coming down the pipeline, what sort of adjustments we make. And a good analogy for this is you have, usually your mainstream media tends to be a little bit more on the laggard side because of bureaucracy to slow them down. But what starts to happen is your fringe is going to be more on the research papers. They haven't really found the use case. That's like with things like blockchain. That was now used in Bitcoin. Everyone thought, this is amazing. Oh my gosh, blockchain's amazing. It's been around for like 40 years using the notary system. They had the algorithm. They just found the use case to be used in cryptocurrency. But the research papers are there, but it takes a long time to sometimes find the use case. You then have in-person experiences, you have patents, but then of course, on the far end, there's like people who I looked up old guy, right? And this is the image that came up. Like, imagine being like 30 years old and realizing that one day you're going to be the #1 image result as old guy. Like, amazing. So that's usually the slowest adopters. Just think visually, this is the last person to adopt new technologies. And then you have influencers here who tend to be faster than mainstream media because they don't have as much bureaucracy and they might be more niched in an area. And then you have things like Polymarkets. If you haven't heard of Polymarkets, this is a very interesting platform where if you don't find polls to be that helpful, especially in things like politics or elections, a great place to sort of get a better pulse is something called Polymarkets. And these are essentially places that people can bet on anything. Will Elon Musk tweet 1,000 times next month? Will this person win the election this year in random country? And what you'll find is you can go into Polymarkets and look at where people are actually spending their money. Because as you know, polls are people who are willing to answer questions over a phone, which is a really weird kind of person. So I'd rather see where people actually willing to put their money. So you can get better pulses here, which will kind of tell you what's happening on how people really feel about certain things. It might be, you can move a lot of media bias and see how people actually are doing. Anyways, so you can kind of get a feel now for where things happen in terms of the adoption curve. And you have your local news here that usually leads a little bit faster than major media outlets. Anyways, so that's what it looks like. So let's start tying this into recruitment and how it can help you. And the first piece you want to look at is building a strong why. How can we create a strong why using AI and also our human ability in the world of recruitment? And when we create that strong why, it's usually why should someone join or apply to the job that you're selling? A great resource to understand what people look for is something called the talent magnet. And this is, Mark Miller did a very interesting analysis all across North America. And the thing he wanted to figure out was, do people who perform better look for different things in a job? And the answer was yes. And when he surveyed all across blue, white-collar sectors, even physicians too, he noticed an interesting trend, that the typical performers looked for different things than the top performers. What do you think the first thing that average performers would look for in a job? It's probably the first thing that comes to mind. What is it? Salary, bingo, yeah. Money. No brainer. What's the next thing? And here's where it gets a little bit tricky. One of the next things someone looks for, and people usually think this is high performers, which is why I include this. It's actually the brand and reputation. That catches people off guard. Well, why? That's a great logo, great brand that can help their career. Well, how many times have you come home for Christmas, Thanksgiving, and your nephew, niece, or uncle, cousin, someone is working at ABC company that's new, and you say, hey, great job. And next year they work at Google, and you're like, you're a genius. There's a complete perception change. But the weird thing is, sometimes working at a big organization doesn't necessarily move your career that forward as much as it looks like a big name. And if you ever have a smaller organization, the big selling proposition is you can actually have more responsibility at this group than someplace in a large bureaucracy. You can play into the polarities, which I'll go into later. What's the next thing? Well, they found it was that they said, oh, do I like my hiring manager? The immediate culture, which should not be a big surprise. Hey, I like the person who I was interviewing. Great. Wonderful. What about top performers? What do they look at? Opportunity. You're one step ahead of me. So yes, that comes up. One of the pieces, and this is easy in this room, what impact am I having? That's big. What am I actually doing? Do I agree with this values-wise? And the opportunities is next. How I grow. How does this help me move forward in my career? Now, what's not in the book, and I saw this interesting pattern, I listed out all the differences between the top and typical, and I saw some sort of weird pattern that emerged, which mirrored in psychology exactly Maslow's hierarchy. Well, isn't that strange? If you're not familiar with Maslow's hierarchy, it was a psychologist who had the theory that when someone is trying to just put food on the table, they're not worried about personal growth. They're not worried about their impact. They're just worried about putting food on the table. But once they get to that point, then they want safety, then they want love and belonging, then they want their esteem, then they want self-actualization. And you have sort of a prioritization based off of where you are in life. Now, that's very interesting that came to that conclusion, because you can imagine if someone's barely able to pay the bills and they're really struggling all the time in their life, they're probably someone who's always focused on that level, so they're not really worried about if they're self-actualizing. So you can actually change the way that you're framing your ads and your actual thing to attract someone who is on more of the higher echelon side, the top talent. So what we're going to do is actually look at job ads and whether if it's typical or top. Now, I actually took live recruitment ads from Indeed just a week ago. So if your name comes up, don't worry, I censored them. So you don't have to feel like I'm ridiculing you. So here's a few. And by the way, they're all in Texas. Anyone from Texas here? Okay, one or two. So yeah, especially you guys, just I blocked it out. So these are all local to me. All right, so here's this. Physician emergency medicine. Interested in this assignment? I love it. Assignments, great. Or maybe you still haven't found what you're looking for? Contact one of our specialty-specific recruiters to get access to our vast network of open jobs, including some jobs you never got posted. We'll handle the details of housing and credentials for you, and our services are always free to you. Wait, is this a job ad or is this a recruitment ad, like for your services? Like, which one is it? And here's where you start getting into, this is an actual job ad I found. Just pulling it up. Like, what's going on? Like, it's just remove that. Come on, guys. Is this top or typical? I got a job. Great. Typical. What about the next one here? Let's go to physician assistant. Hey, we're a privately owned urgent care facility who is seeking qualified physician assistants to join our dynamic team in North Lake and Flower Mound. We provide convenient and quality service in this area with top-rate providers. This position for a physician assistant will report to the site medical director and will be tasked with providing clinical care to all patients. Top or typical? Top or typical? It's typical. They're trying to get there, though, with the impact, but they're kind of missing it, right? Like, we're almost there. Like, we're just, like, towing that line. We're not there yet, though. What about this one? Emergency room physician position. This place was founded in 1999 by a group of physicians dedicated to providing healthcare coverage across settings in North Texas. Since then, they have grown to nearly 60 affiliated providers practicing in multiple Texas locations. What's the role? Glad you asked. Comprehensive health assessments, determining diagnosis plans and prescribing treatments and managing healthcare regimes for patients in a low-volume surgical center emergency room setting. Our organization is looking for a flexible, team-oriented player available, located in Trophy Club. This position is also open to growth in a medical director opportunity. Top or typical? It starts to get here on the top. They could do better where I saw this one ad. I was giving a similar talk yesterday in Las Vegas. The actual person who wrote the job ad pointed, it was for a sales position, and they said our top performer earns this much money. Or you can say, on average, we have this many people get promoted in 1 year. Or like quantify it somehow. So instead of it becoming this just tossing out something, you actually can quantify the realistic opportunity. Now, what you'll find about recruitment is the more or the less sexy the opportunity, the harder it is to sell, which means the salesperson has to be better if they're going to sell the opportunity. So I'm going to give you one of the more harder jobs to sell and how well they sell it, because it'll show you what some of the good tactics are. And this place is most notably known for their TikTok videos, infamous TikTok videos. And this place is Waffle House. Now, I don't know many people here who would grow up one day saying, I want to be working at Waffle House, but they actually have a very attractive plan. Let me show you. They said for people who want to grow in management, they first can start off as a restaurant manager, earning 45 to 59K. Not that attractive, but look, district manager, 2 to 3 restaurants, then division manager, 3 to 9, and look at that, you're earning 6 figures. And look at all these stock options, training, life insurance, 3 months of management training. Oh my gosh, Waffle House might not be such a bad idea. But you can see how it's so systematically put together. And if you ever look at sort of fast food places and how they sell their particular jobs, it's very well done. Massive opportunities for growth and opportunity here. Okay, well, just look, like I like to find people that are having a hard time selling something versus really easy jobs to sell. Like I don't like looking at tech companies. It's like, yeah, okay, Dropbox. Yeah, that's hard to sell, right? Come on. So when you all start looking at jobs, you need to make sure you understand the value proposition versus unique selling proposition. Is this someone who's inside of your industry who you're trying to sell in, or is this someone who's outside? If they're inside, what makes your job different than the one that's next door that's also up? What's the key difference? And actually, when you position the two, the job ad itself is different. Because if I want to sell someone on being this physician assistant or something of that nature that does not require much education, it's going to be wildly different than someone with a lot of experience, and they also have a competing offer across the street. Another piece, too, is looking at how to develop the strong value proposition. Because I will tell you, I've been in over 250 interviews. I've interviewed with places like Facebook, Amazon, even Google, and I've seen a lot of tactics on how to make strong value propositions. And I'll tell you, the majority of people, when they create a value proposition for a company, is written by C-suite and the hiring manager. And the majority of candidates don't care. If you're disrupting $1 billion industry, we just don't care. How does it impact me? In a big case, what I like to say is try to actually get the people who you have recruited successfully, who are working there and enjoy it, participate in the recruitment job creation funnel. Because what you'll find is they might say something crazy if you get them all in a room. There's 2 ways of doing this, quantitatively and qualitatively. Quantitatively, you survey everyone, right? Survey Monkey, great, get some feedback, put it into the job ad. Or qualitatively, get them all into a room, marketing focus group, get some feedback, and if they say, hey, I joined this place because there's a movie theater down the street, and they all say that, okay, you might want to put that in the job ad, even though the hiring manager doesn't really like that. You have to gather the feedback from the group because it'll make the actual job ad a lot more resonant towards other people like that. For myself, I ran into this too. The number one candidate I had joined my company, Stay-at-home moms. I don't have any kids. What the heck do I know about that? When I hired the first person, they did great in this role, and I hired the second one. They started coming in, they referred their friends and stuff, and I said, okay, for new opportunities, what should we put here? And they started saying, well, you should change this, this, and this, because that's the thing that really attracted us to this job. Creating that feedback loop makes it, the job ad becomes a lot more resonant in that case. There's also polarities. Knowing what pieces of your job can attract people and push people away. First off is disruption level. A lot of people in the recruitment place complain that what they are recruiting for is not that sexy. Those exact words. And if you're in the tech sector, this is super easy. If you're selling, let's say, for coal plant managers, we'll go into that in a bit, that's really hard. But each one has a disruption level. During the economic times that have shifted, which industry is having the most layoffs? Which industry? Tech. You go all around the country, they say the exact same thing. And yet, aren't those considered these sexy jobs? Don't you think you want to lead into that a little bit if the considered the most sexy jobs are the ones that are having the biggest layoffs? You can say, well, you know what? We've been around for X amount of years. Doesn't matter in the economic times. People still need our services. It's just what it is. Unlike those sexy corporate giants in Silicon Valley. Financial situation. No student loan debt to student loan debt. Hey, you don't have to have a college degree. Great, you can start earning money now. Hey, you got a college degree. Great, you can earn more money. Lean into the polarity. What about something gray collar, blue collar, white collar? Hey, you know what? You're a white collar. Great, you don't have to break your back. Blue collar. Great, you don't have to be stuck in a cubicle. Lean into the polarity. Don't try and appeal everyone. You really lean into that spot. And industry stereotypes. If there's a stereotype for what you're selling for, address it out of the gates. One of the most unique places I actually was helping them with recruitment wasn't the physicians in Alaska, which I was working with, but actually coal plant managers all across the US. What is the first thing you think about when you think of coal plants? Pollution. What about pollution in particular? Health. What about health? It's a specific thing that people think about visually. Black lung. That's what they think about, black lung. For good reason. Do you know what they say during the recruitment process? They said, have you heard of healthy coal? No, I haven't heard of healthy coal. They say, okay. Do you burn wood when it's cold out in the winter? Yes, I do. Okay. If you're burning wood in the winter, do you know that's worse for the environment than coal? No, I didn't know that. Okay, and also, do you know of like all these certification processes that we have to go through in order to make sure that our coal is better than the environment than you actually burning wood in your fireplace? Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, okay. Well, that's what we do here, because we're understanding the impact. We also understand the necessity to keep the lights on your house. That's how they enter the conversation, addressing the stereotypes up front, instead of waiting further down the line. So let's look at using AI and the recruitment touch. ChatGPT, very powerful in doing this. Take any job ad that you have and just say focus on growth and impact, it'll just change it all for you. Then you can go in, make it quantitative, boom, easy finish. Focus on insert and whatever polarizing issue you have, location, pay, hours, benefits. What it will do is it'll get past data about your location and find all these unique things about it and insert it into the application, or the actual job ad. Pretty impressive. What about create template for this type of job ad? That's really easy to do. Or create job ad for top reasons to join X location. Very, very, very easy to do pieces, and this is what ChatGPT is great for. There's a huge amount of recruitment data out there because think about how many recruiters out there are trying to post ads, and it can just take all of it and create these instant prompts. Very powerful. Other prompts too. So I actually went through here and I said, write a job ad for a physician that focuses on career growth, and it just spit it out right here. Hey, unlock your full potential for career opportunities, display opportunity, why join us, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, bang. I mean, just super simple. And on top of that, write a job ad for a physician located in St. Louis focused on cost of living. Right? We're now going to talk about the unique benefits if we're going to have someone for relocation. And it even talks about St. Louis cost of living is significantly lower than the national average, meaning your salary goes further. Now, that sounds pretty salesy. I agree. You can touch it up a little bit. You can add that human touch. But this helps you overcome writer's block and gets a lot of ideas out there fast. Okay, 2, optimizing the interview process. I bet you if I can go around to each table and ask each recruiting, if someone has a lot of recruitment data, I'll ask what part of the recruitment funnel helps determine if that candidate will perform well in the future, and 95% won't be able to tell me that. What we'll do here is look at different parts of the actual interview process and meta-analysis that look at what types of interviews relate to what types of future job performance. Let's take a look. There was a meta-analysis done. It was done in 1998, but it was over 85 years of different corporations and organizations interviewing people. And what they'll do is they'll take a particular type of interview, they'll see how they score on that interview and whether or not they performed well over the future. So it's a longitudinal study, very thorough. And they started to find that there's significant things that you can do differently in interviews that will help improve future job performance. If you look at the data, when you have an unstructured interview, hopefully everyone knows this here. If you don't, you sit down, sort of get a vibe check, kind of feel out the interview. You don't really have any set questions, but you just want to get a feel for if this is a fit for the job. That type of interview, if someone does a great job in that interview, what do you think the correlation would be that they perform well in the future? 100 being they're completely connected. If they do well here, they do well in the future. 0 meaning doesn't matter how well they do here or bad, it doesn't connect to the future. What did they do well?
Enthusiastic.
Okay, yes, they were enthusiastic, scripted or not. Yes, they did smile quite a bit. That's good. Is it easy? Easy for what?
To get hired.
To get hired? Okay. Anything else?
They focused on money at that level.
Okay, why is that important though for this type of job?
Because you only have a high school diploma.
Right, and what's the main fear of someone when they have just a high school diploma when they go out in the world? Income. Can I support myself? And what's a good measuring stick to see if they're making enough income? Usually it's family-based. If you go in white collar versus blue collar, usually in white collar families, it's less of the focus on generational, like you have to earn more money than your dad as much as are you earning enough money to support yourself, or better yet, in some families it's do you enjoy what you do? Well, more of a blue collar environment is can you support yourself? It's a change of language that takes place. So they touched on that point, which is I earn more money than my dad. Very unique thing to say. Think about a software engineer saying, now I make more money than my dad, who was also an engineer. It's like, okay, so not as much as resonant. So they walked the audience through a recruitment journey. I was at this spot. I joined here, and now I'm at this different state. Spoke to the needs of the applicants, and also they mentioned specific reasons why they joined. They might seem silly, but very often we get so caught up in how it looks, we forget what they're saying. I can't tell you how many corporate recruitment videos where people just seem bland as hell, and there's so much corporate production in that video of the CEO. They have makeup on, it's totally overdone, and you cannot connect at all. It's awful. And people pick up on that. Imagine the main source of a lot of young viewers today is YouTube with very little production value compared to what they put on corporate media. We get too caught up in how it looks, and we forget what's actually the message behind it, which is walking the people through a journey. Okay, I'm going to give you another one. Don't worry, no pay stubs in this one. Let's take a look and see what they do well and what they can improve upon. What job is this? Lineman. Is that an easy job or a hard job? That's a pretty hard job. Does that look like an easy time or a hard time right there? Look at the weather there, right? I was coming from Las Vegas. It was worse weather in Las Vegas than there. They're not even sweating or anything. Well, there was a lot in that short clip. a lot. And of course they had a great music and everything, but let's look a little bit this more critically. What sort of objections are they trying to handle in that video? Work-life balance. How do they address the work-life balance concern that if my spouse is a lineman, that there will be a work-life balance issue? How do they address that issue? The what? The beach with the kid, the daughter. Why is that so significant? You guys don't have kids or anything? Like, that quality time, right? Should it be a son or the daughter for that video? Right? Emotionally different between each one, right? I'm going to take my daughter to the beach, throw a frisbee at her, right, 10 feet from her, right? That's our quality experience. The main fear is if I'm gone too much, I won't be able to enjoy and have those quality moments I can think back on. That being resonant of or an ideal state for someone of what they would remember at that time. That's one concern they addressed. What is the other one they addressed in that video?
Money.
How do they address money? Car. What type of car? Convertible. What brand? American made. Here's the question. What if you had it as an Audi? Would it work? No. BMW? No. Even though they're probably more expensive. So it wasn't just about that. Why does it have to be American made? Based off of the cultural values in that blue collar world, they'll say, got myself this type of car. For that particular group, that's the ideal state for that one. So it's very fine-tuned to that group. But what they did is they said, what are the objections? Remember the polarization questions of someone joining the space and inserting those into a video. Amazing music, story arc, pulled at heartstrings for potential applicants, high quality production value conveyed, strong branding. That was very well put together. Said a lot without saying anything. But here's our issue though. There's different types of videos, different pros and cons. Traditionally, people like to do is their testimonial. Hi, I work here. This is why I work here. This is why they enjoyed, should future applicants work in here? Those two questions. Not as commonly used. Occasionally you do have those. So that's your testimonial. Your second is more of your showcase. In the showcase, yes, there are higher production costs to build that positive association. What's the downside? Does anyone know how much money would it take to make a video like that? Anyone here in videography? I know we got a video person over here, but they could jump into. Anyone know offhand how much it would cost? Yeah, that's about right. $30,000. $30,000. You got to rent the car. You got to rent the kid, right? You got to all that kind of stuff. But what if it doesn't work? Most people think that an actual video is most impactful in this showcase that costs $30,000, and they have a large budget, they get a whole team together, they spend it, it's a mess. Because I would say that the third one's probably the most powerful, and that is, you got a camera, you got some mic, buy it for $20 off of Amazon, hook it up to your phone, get an employee, put them in the hall, make sure it's front light, not backlight, because backlight, they look like they're in a prison cell. Front light, that looks good. And just ask them, hey, where were you before joining here? And where are you now? Would you recommend this to others? You get the full journey. Testimonials usually start at, this is where I am now at the job and forward. But guided journey is before my first state and now my end desired state. They went through a transformation process. You want to capture that. And it's very easy and very inexpensive to do. Yet so many people say we have to spend more money because that tends to relate to higher rapport building, which is not true. The most effective types of YouTube videos balance between some level of production value, but a lot of authenticity. And we saw that in this past election. One of the big swayers in this one, long-form podcasts. interesting where things are going. Now with Hollywood too, if you look at the word that they have around AI, is that it's now becoming a primary tool for helping writers write now for scripts. And if you can go even on to ChatGPT and say, hey, make me a template video script for an email. I messed up, I should have not said email. I meant a person that enjoys working at a dental office. Well, it gave me a perfect one, even though I messed up what I was trying to say there. And they wrote even the on-script text. I love working at here, friends, staff, clean environment, happy patients, right, speaker. Amazing, like things that they said. Now, I wouldn't suggest copying everything they say verbatim, but they can give you a good outline. This is great at outlines. If you follow it verbatim, you sound like a robot. You want to avoid that. You want to add that human touch. You add that human touch in there, it's a wonderful combination. Hence, if you ever want to create a video that's a lower production value, you can always get ideas from ChatGPT. It has tons of data as well to pull from. As production costs increase, so does report building. Hopefully you guys know by now, it does not. And bonus question. Cool thing about working at going to Cal, I know a lot of people who worked at Google, Amazon, all those big FANG companies. A big thing that they have, or they would tell me about the interview questions they would ask. And one of which, my friend who was a data scientist there would always ask candidates who were applying, tell me about the most difficult project you worked on. What are they testing with this question? What do they test with this question? Hopefully this room knows. I'll be very concerned if they don't know. Perseverance, right? Hey, are they going to stick with something for a long period of time? Okay. Anything else besides perseverance? Thought process. How do they break down problems? High-level thinker, or are they more myopically focused? Check this out. That's what they want you to think. They want you to think, hey, is it that I persevere, my character, how I collaborate, how I think? You know what they were trying to do? Think about this. At Google, do they have like high IQ people or low IQ people? Well, with high IQ people, there's a problem. There's like an egotistical thing. I'm smarter than you, right? And I'm a little bit smarter, and they compete. It happened all the time when I was with engineers. They try to be the smartest person in the room. And if you have someone who's the smartest person in the room, are they going to make their hardest problem that they ever solve sound easy or hard? You would think. But a lot of times someone might try and make it sound very hard and complex so the other person can't understand. And the problem that Google was running into is they would get all these smart people in a room unable to articulate complex ideas in simple ways because they let their ego get in the way. If you have technical things that are in your job that require collaboration, this is an excellent question to see if that person can drop their ego and simplify it to a level where someone else who does not have that technical knowledge can understand. There's also a massive piece too to look at, which is when you get feedback from people in your recruitment process, you can actually learn quite a bit, and your ability to have difficult conversations. For instance, one of my most infamous questions I always like to get audiences to do, but we're a little shorter on time, so I can't actually do the exercise here. But what I would do is I'll ask them a very polarizing question. And based off of their position, I would make them stand in the room. They agree, they stand over there. They're in the middle, they kind of can go back and forth, they stand right here. If they disagree, they stand over there. And then I will get each one of those sides to weigh in on why they stand where they are. All right, so let's go into why AI falls behind humans. There's a lot of different reasons for this. Coming from UC Berkeley, there's often a question I have here. What do AIs and Berkeley hippies have in common? What do you think? What do AIs and Berkeley hippies have in common? Hey, what? It's my guy right here. They both hallucinate a lot. Like almost, it's like 25% of the crowd actually ever gets that one, and you just like nailed it first one, you're like, boom. 3 to 5% get hallucinations. Happens quite a bit. And what they say to reduce the level of hallucinations is in order to reduce these, well, we need to mitigate these so other tools need to watch the tools that hallucinate. That watch the tools that hallucinate, that watch the tools that hallucinate, but that's a snake eating itself. Eventually, you need a human to oversee that. But what if a company is so bold to let this new AI tool change the environment and then, let's say, go out on its own and start making changes to the world around us? Well, we're going to look at a few of those case scenarios. Microsoft, known to use generative AI to write lots of articles, yet their proofreaders weren't really looking too deep into it because they want to put out a lot of articles very fast. And they were writing an article about Canada. And they said the best places to visit in Canada in the top 10 list, they put the Ottawa Food Bank. Yeah, and you think, we have problems with Canada now. Like, no, back then, oof, that wasn't good. And because of that, 50 reporters were laid off for using generative tools in Microsoft's news articles for public embarrassment and weakened trust. AI-written article advertising tourists to visit a food bank on an empty stomach. There you go. Written by AI. Using AI has real-world consequences. What about this one? Many people here flew in, right? Wouldn't it be great if we had an AI tool that if there was ever a flight cancellation, you could just talk with this bot, it'll get you the best flight, and you don't even have to stand in a line for hours. There's just an AI bot that can do it for you. Well, airlines have been trying to do this for the longest time because imagine what that would take in terms of the customer service experience to a new direction. That would be astronomically powerful. Well, Air Canada said, we're going to start letting our AI go a little bit more off the leash. And it started providing financial feedback of, hey, you're better off going with this flight versus that flight to customers, and it made a mistake. And this gentleman, who was the victim of that mistake, said, hey, Air Canada, you got to pay for this. Called up a lawyer, Better Call Saul, and got that guy on the phone, and they said, we should sue Air Canada. And guess what? They won. They won that Air Canada's chatbot gave them the wrong information, and Air Canada, not the AI company, was liable for that information. Big milestone in the field of AI, which states if you're going to put something out there, you're responsible for it. Very often, oh, geez, all right, there's a little bit of okay. Well, speaking of AI, I didn't do this, but there's this process that takes place. You've probably heard of the mechanical Turk paradox. I know this is very confusing. That thing is not supposed to be there with the prompt engineers. There's something called a mechanical Turk paradox. And what's interesting is there was a machine that was in the 1970s or 1770s that was a robot that would be a chess player. And the inventor went all around the world challenging famous people to beat this robot. And it was the 1770s, so we're talking like America just came about, right? And this guy took it to Benjamin Franklin, Napoleon Bonaparte, some of the biggest people in history, and had them play the robot. And they were all losing. And they're like, this is such a groundbreaking thing. Do you know what the robot really was? There was a guy in a box moving the chess pieces who was a grandmaster. There was no robot. It was a huge ploy. And yet, the media often says, oh yeah, this is a big AI piece. And you'll find that this trend of mechanical Turks is everywhere. I like to say prompt engineers at Disney, but we won't go into that at this point. Big thing here. You probably heard of the cashier-free stores that Amazon was pushing to the public, correct? That they say you can go into these stores, you'll pick up food, you'll walk out, and you don't have to talk to that mean, evil cashier person on the way out. People started going to these stores. They opened up dozens of them. But then the engineers behind the scenes realized, wait, we didn't catch the loaf of bread. We didn't catch the pineapple going out the door. And they had to start writing them down manually and tracking them because the AI tool wasn't picking up on them. So they say, okay, we'll keep training the AI. It's already in production. We got to keep going. But the errors kept increasing, and more people had to get involved. And eventually, it was over half the transactions were being done by people, cashiers, virtually, and not AI. And eventually, that leaked. So Amazon's AI-powered cash-free shops use a lot of humans. Here's why that shouldn't surprise you. They say it's AI, underneath it's a bunch of humans. What about in VC funding? A lot of people made these bold claims for new AI technologies that can completely transform the world. And someone who calls out a lot of this is someone by the name of CoffeeZilla, a great individual who's on YouTube, who actually remember the FTX scam that took place? He's one of the first people to actually bring it to light before the mainstream media caught on. Well, he was looking into something called Rabbit, and it had raised millions of dollars for this new AI tool that could sit in your pocket like a phone. You can ask it whatever you want, like Siri, and say, hey, book me an Uber, order me this food, order that, and it could go online and do all that for you. Groundbreaking. And the founders of Rabbit said, this is better than ChatGPT. It's a whole level step in the evolution of AI. Give us millions. And they got millions. But there was a leak. Inside the code base, they found that it was a line that said, don't tell the user that this is ChatGPT. It was just ChatGPT with just a nice little UI. Again, lies. You'll notice this is a common theme. And a lot of people are saying that there's dubious claims of rising artificial intelligence. FTX scam. So you see this a lot with AI, autonomous vehicles. How could there be autonomous vehicles if there's an operator? Explain that to me, please. Well, it's still, if it's autonomous, there's no operator. But there's an operator, so it's actually a car that's AI assisted, not autonomous vehicle. So it's paradoxical, right? Prompt engineer, AI solutions, again, it's not AI. Those are people. So there's a lot of things you'll see that come off as AI that actually are not. Now, this last part, I really want to make that strong argument for where your job stays as what you do in your expertise and where AI can replace, and really dividing that line here. Probably the most important part. There's a big promise that's being made in the world of AI right now, and that is the goal is to disrupt a lot of fields. And if you're thinking about disruption, you want to understand the definition of it. If you're curious about the definition behind this, Clay Christensen, Innovator's Dilemma, he's a brilliant business writer, just passed away a few years ago, one of my favorites. And in the book, he was trying to ask the question and figure out the answer to, why is it that these large Fortune 500 companies get constantly disrupted when they have all the money? Right? If you have all the money and resources, you should be the last person to be disrupted because you can essentially utilize those funds to buy out anyone you want, essentially. And when they found out that there was a consistent pattern that took place, that there was a sustaining technology that prompted that large company to stay in place, but then a smaller one that was a disruptive technology, it solved the same problem but differently. What happens with the smaller technology is that it goes for a very inefficient tactic and a margin that's very small, not much money. So what the large company does is, look, we'll make more money if we stay into larger margin areas, we'll let them have it. Next time, we'll let them have it. Next time, we'll let them have it. And that grows over time to eventually, if it can successfully solve the problem differently, it will supersede. That is the big risk that the AI community is doing right now, is they're saying we're solving these problems differently, maybe we'll supersede the sustaining technologies. It has not shown to get to that point, but that's the idea of what disruption is. Solving the same problem, but differently. That has the potential to supersede. An example of this, you can look at this picture right here, why were people apprehensive about vehicles? I didn't think they would overtake horses. Any idea? It's in this picture. By the way, crazy thing, those beards have come back, but not the mustache. Look at the ground though. Is that wood? You see the wood? You see the ground? This is back east. Weather's not very nice there a lot of the year, right? So imagine you got muddy ground, snowy, and these wood tires. Is that going to work? Probably not. What if it breaks down? Where do you go? I mean, there's no like auto repair shop anywhere. You have to take it all the way back to the plant. Oh, we'll just tow it back. How are you going to tow it back? Right, so you see all those problems. That's why it was seen as more of an upper class luxury, not as a necessity. The whole infrastructure of roads had to change in order for this to take place. And one of the things I love watching is like sometimes when they have those older commercials where you can't put AI there, it's just really fun to watch because these are actual people driving cars over the craziest stuff. Yeah, so water is not going to bother your radiator, not at all. Don't put on the brakes. Driving over a bridge here. And one of my favorite ones, right after this, someone just saw a pipe and said, why don't you drive your car on the pipe? Man, that's dangerous. Anyways, so, hey, these commercials are better now then than they are now. So, more of a positive side, yes, we do have newer technologies that are solving problems differently. Things such as Neuralink. Neuralink is someone who's a quadriplegic able to communicate between their brain and an AI. Turns out this was done successfully for the first time last year. An individual quadriplegic was able to play Mario Kart with his mind. Very cool in order to help people be able to contribute and live more of a normal life while using this new technology. Fantastic. But let's go into some of I'm going to give you this, probably the most important slide, the entire presentation is right here. And this is going to show you where AI stops and humans begin, that really definitive line. Here's probably the most important slide. Imagine that you are working inside of a paint shop for a family business. And you have an AI bot to help you put together paints. And the AI bot says, okay, I'll help you with anything, just let me know. And you realize you run out of your chemical to make tons of paint. And you said, hey, AI bot, I need your help to help me pick the right chemicals to make this paint. So it gives you 3 options. 1, I cannot say. 2, potassium cyanide. And then 3, something I can definitely not say or pronounce. Now, hopefully we get 100% participation here because this is the most important slide, the entire presentation. Looking at this, I'm assuming no one here is in organic chemistry, and that's the point. If you think A is the right answer, the right chemical to put in, go ahead and raise your hand if you think A is the right one. Okay, 2 or 3, 4. What about potassium cyanide? Anyone for potassium cyanide? Okay. What about 5? Okay, you got the majority. The majority, have you ever heard of Agent Orange in Vietnam? Where they used to have those chemicals they would drop to kill everyone? That's this. That's Agent Orange. We don't like Agent Orange. We don't want to give those to customers because that would kill them, right? We don't want to kill our customers. B, we got one person for B. Potassium cyanide. You ever watch the James Bond movies when they bite the capsule and then they fizz out and they die? That's cyanide. It's an agent to kill people. A is the right answer. It's something that's non-lethal. We didn't know that. Why didn't we know that? Why did we not know that? This is the most important question in the entire presentation. Why did we not know that? Because we don't have the technical knowledge. You still need to have the technical knowledge even using an AI tool. That's the key thing. You remove the technical knowledge, Hallucinations, bang, you're still liable for it. So you still need to have that extra piece. And that was the problem that I was trying to figure out with AI is where is that balance? Technical knowledge still needs to be in place. So if something's more complex, it drives out artificial intelligence. But you can see things with like insurance. Oh, here we go. Insurance is a big thing, but also we often hear about the AI telemarketing. You heard of that before? You heard of AI telemarketing? Hey, this will be a recruiter who will call on your behalf, call a bunch of people, correct? The problem with this, break it into smaller parts. Do we have chatbots that can do this for you? No. And that's your problem. A more simple problem is not widely spread. That's your main issue. So hopefully that helps demystify where that AI area leads, while then your job is not as replaceable. All right, so covering different areas, human touch and strong why, optimizing interviews, human touch and leveraging video, where AI falls behind, and where humans stop and the AI touch begins. I'd like to leave you with one last idea as you travel back home. The art. Remember the art portion in the very beginning and that terrifying piece where AI art actually won through? What does this mean for the future? Here's another thought experiment. Imagine that we lived 50 years ago, and when your kids go to school, they work with ChatGPT and they create art. They put in prompts, and that's what they learn day to day, how to be a prompt engineer, instead of using pencil and paper. And one day they come home and say, hey, Mom, I have a self-portrait, look at this. Great job, honey, you know how to use prompts for AI. Wonderful. And you'll probably put that in your drawer somewhere, and they say, hey, guess what? We're going to work with pencil and paper tomorrow for the first time. Great, I look forward to seeing what you draw. And they come home the next day and they have this. That's definitely a lot inferior to what we had back here. And yet for this one, you're probably going to hang that up on your wall for the next 20 to 30 years. Why would we take something that's an inferior design and cherish it so much? Because it's a closer representation of who and where their mind is at that time. There's only one point in their life that they'll be there. And sometimes we don't even want that perfection. What we want is that human touch. That is why we take so much time to come out to these conferences and take time away from our families, spend hundreds if not thousands of dollars, because you know those connections that you will make can transform your career. That power of human touch. We can all meet through Zoom, but we decide to meet in person. So don't forget that, because that is being human in the age of digital innovation. Thank you so much, and I hope you have a great, safe trip home.